Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS. Continuing on with college football week one. Probably got the best game of the week here. Clemson, Georgia. This one's at a neutral site. It's in Atlanta. So Clemson, Georgia, let's do it.
Welcome to the SWUS. The SWUS. SWUS. Hey, get the SWUS.
All right, like I said, we got Clemson, Georgia at a neutral site here. Looks like everywhere it's dropped down to 13.5 now. There were 14s out there for a while, but it looks like Georgia is now laying 13.5. Pretty much consensus. Total sitting at 48.5. Let's take a quick look at the spreadsheet. According to the model, we got to lean on Georgia, 35.3 to 20.8. So, I mean, pretty much right on par with where the sports books have it, lean towards the over. But again, as I keep mentioning, this model's built with last year's metrics, so pretty much disregard it. All right, so let's get into this one. And why don't we start with the last time these two teams met? Final score was 10-3. Not a ton of offense in that game. In fact, Clemson had just 182 yards of offense. Not that Georgia did much offensively either. This game was back in 2021, so pretty much irrelevant. So let's go ahead and start talking about this Clemson team. Coming off their first season with less than 10 wins since 2010. 13 consecutive seasons with 10 or more wins snapped last year. But I do have to say, they're in pretty good shape this year. Really like their offense. They're bringing back a ton of production. Here are their metrics from last year. And obviously, if you watch college football, you know that Clemson's offense definitely underperformed last year. Total offense, 97th in yards per play, 36th in success rate. Here are their offensive game logs. And I mean, if you go from week 4 on, from that Florida State game on, honestly, when Clemson missed that field goal in the Florida State game, that team just died. I mean, their heart died. Look at all the red after that. I mean, weren't even really getting the run game going in a lot of these games as well. So Clemson offense just really underperformed. But like I said, I really like the way they're shaping up this year because they bring back a ton of production. They're 33rd in overall returning production, but they bring 9 returning starters back in the offense, 13th in offensive returning production. And it starts with quarterback Cade Klubnik, who, look, I really don't think Cade Klubnik's that bad. It's kind of like we were talking about DJU in the Florida State video last week. He's just put into a situation where he needs to be an NFL superstar in the making or everyone's going to hate him. So, I mean, was it a great year for Klubnik last year? No. But I don't think it was absolutely terrible. I mean, over 2,500 yards, 19 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 6.1 yards per attempt, definitely a little shaky. But also, they didn't get the best production as far as wide receivers last year either. But I think the most concerning thing about Cade Klubnik last year was he really didn't finish the season strong. I mean, he started off looking a lot better. Look at his numbers from the last 6 games of last season. 193 passing yards per game, 6 touchdowns, 5 picks. Played his best football early in the season. But again, like I mentioned, didn't get a ton of production from the wide receiver position. In fact, the leading receiver on the team was a freshman, Tyler Brown, and obviously he's back, as well as 4 of their top 5 wide receivers are back. So certainly should see a dramatic step forward from Clemson as far as wide receiver production. Also, they're fine at running back. I mean, Will Shipley's gone. He's in the NFL. But when he got hurt last year, Phil Maffa came in and looked like a monster. In fact, you could probably make arguments that at times he looked even better than Shipley. I mean, I know that's kind of a crazy thing to say. Shipley's in the NFL. But this kid, Phil Maffa, he looks to be the real deal. So they're fine at wide receiver. They're fine at running back. What about the offensive line? Well, their offensive line was pretty solid last year. You could look at the numbers here, 19th in stuff rate, 32nd in power success rate, decent run blocking unit, decent pass blocking unit. Certainly not as good as we're used to seeing from Clemson, but I have good news. Everyone's back. Everyone's back on the Clemson offensive line except the center, which further hammers home the point I'm making, which is this Clemson offense is in really good shape. I mean, there's not many years where Clemson doesn't send their whole offense to the NFL. 4 of the top 5 receivers, superstar running back, pretty much the whole offensive line back, quarterback back for his 3rd year. I mean, Clemson isn't in that kind of position often. So I really think this Clemson offense is going to turn some heads this year. The problem is they've got their hands full. They're opening up against Georgia, and as we know, Georgia is as elite as it gets across the board. Now, on the defensive side last year, we did see some holes in the Georgia defense, specifically early in the season. They were actually getting the ball run on them, which is just not what we're used to seeing when it comes to Georgia football. You can see their run defense numbers. You might be thinking 27th in yards per carry allowed, 51st in success rate, 17th in effective rush. It's not bad at all. No, those numbers are great. But by Georgia Bulldog standards, I mean, this team is usually 1, 2, or 3 in every run defense metric there is. So this is actually a step backwards for Georgia's defense as far as defending the run last year. And also their pass rush wasn't really there last year. The 48th ranked pass rush, does that sound like a Georgia defensive front? 93rd in sack rate, 68th in pass rush win rate. I mean, yeah, Georgia's defensive line just didn't perform at Georgia's level, and they still were an unbelievable football team. And I have some good news if you're a Georgia fan. They bring back ton of talent on the defensive front. 5 of Georgia's front 7 on defense from last season are back this year. They've got 2 all-SEC defensive linemen back. They've got an all-SEC linebacker back. And you can kind of say the same thing about Georgia's defense that I was talking about with Clemson's offense. You don't see that very often. Usually, Georgia's sending a handful of their defensive front to the NFL every single year. They don't always get 5 of 7 starters back. So yeah, was last season a down year for Georgia's defensive line by Georgia standards? Sure. But, I mean, they should be right back up where we're used to seeing them, one of the best defensive lines in the country. Now, if you are looking to back Clemson here, you can look at the fact that Georgia runs a lot of man coverage, 51st in man coverage frequency, but look at the numbers. I mean, they're one of the best secondaries in the country when they do run man coverage. The reason I bring that up, Cade Klubnik, much better passing numbers against man coverage last year. 34th in passing grade against man coverage, 62nd in passer rating, 25th in completion percentage against man coverage. Look at those numbers in comparison to his passing numbers against zone. So the fact that Georgia, a defense that likes to run a lot of man coverage, that could be an angle you're looking at here if you're trying to back Clemson. Thing is, I mean, I don't know if these numbers really apply to Georgia's defense because they're just loaded with NFL talent and they're the best defense in the country at running man coverage. So I don't know how much stock I would put into this. Thought it was interesting enough to mention, though. Overall on this side, like I said, I'm big on Clemson's offense this year. I think Cade Klubnik's going to take a big step forward. Big year for the Clemson offensive line. Wide receiver should step forward. Phil Maffa looks like a superstar. I'm big on the Clemson offense. Problem is, I mean, how do you doubt the Georgia defense? I'm sure Clemson's going to be able to put up some points here just because they're just loaded with talent. But as a whole, I don't have a ton of faith in Clemson consistently moving the chains on probably the best defense in the country. Now we look at the other side of Georgia's offense, and I mean, somehow it gets even better for Georgia on this side. I mean, as we know, one of the best, if not the best offensive football last year. I mean, look at these top 10 in every single metric, rushing, passing, total offense. I mean, well-rounded. Georgia does it all. Look at their passing numbers. Look at the columns to the right here. Those are the passing metrics. Just green everywhere. Carson Beck absolutely killed it last year, and he's back. Probably the best quarterback in the country here, Carson Beck. Over 3,500 yards last year, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I mean, there wasn't much he did wrong last year, and I think most people would agree. So no question, Carson Beck set up to have a huge season this year. Did lose a couple of his receiving weapons, though, and we'll talk about that. Now, as far as Trevor Etienne, I mean, I think this is being overblown a little bit. I mean, yeah, Georgia lost both their running backs, so they want him on the field. But it's Georgia. They're loaded with running backs. I mean, they're deep with talent at the running back position. And those 2 running backs they lost, neither of them even got drafted into the NFL. I mean, this is a Georgia team that's used to losing an NFL running back pretty much every year or two. So they're loaded with talent, even if Trevor Etienne doesn't end up playing. And by the way, I believe Georgia policy is allowing him to play. I just don't know if Kirby Smart is going to allow him to play. I believe that's the current situation. I haven't followed it that closely. But basically, the way I see it, I don't think it really moves the needle for me whether he's on the field or off. I mean, he was electric with Florida last year, but the truth is he was still the RB2. Montrell Johnson was the guy that I thought was the RB1 on Florida. Don't get me wrong, Etienne's a crazy playmaker, and I'm sure he'll be a savage here at Georgia. But as far as how I view this game, doesn't really move the needle for me whether he's on the field or not. But now we get to the Georgia offensive line, and this is where it just gets really tough to fade this team. So for starters, this was probably the best offensive line in college football last year. I mean, you could probably make an argument that they've been the best offensive line in college football for a few years. But yeah, last year I'd say they were probably the best offensive line in college football. And it gets even crazier than that. 4 starters return. Just like Clemson gets 4 starters back on their offensive line, Georgia, 4 starters back on the offensive line. So, I mean, hands down, this is probably going to be the best offensive line in college football again. I don't see any way around that. And here's the thing with Clemson's defensive front. I mean, obviously Clemson's defense, elite last year, top 5 defense in the country, no question. One of the best pass defenses in football. 3rd in yards per pass attempt allowed, 2nd in pass defense success rate, 3rd in effective pass, no question. Clemson's defensive line also great last year. They had the 2nd ranked run defense in college football, 34th in defensive line yards. Surprisingly, they struggled in short yardage situations. I mean, 117th in power success rate, which is just weird, but no question, absolutely elite on the defensive front last year. Here's the thing. Just one starter back of the defensive front 7 for Clemson. Now, this graphic is a little misleading. It makes it sound like Clemson's defensive front got absolutely gutted, and that's not the case. I mean, they're loaded. They are still absolutely loaded. I mean, they have 2 All-American freshmen on the defensive line that were All-American freshmen last year. They've got NFL talent for days, but they didn't start last year. So as far as starters, they did lose 6 of the 7. And again, what did I say in the Florida State Georgia Tech video? We're not handicapping the whole season. We're handicapping this game, this week 1 game against Georgia, against the best offensive line in college football. So although this defensive front is still loaded and still going to be one of the best front 7s in the country, I think that Georgia offensive line is going to bully him around a little bit, especially in week 1. Now, I do have a couple conflicting trends here. First one is Georgia's kind of owned Clemson. In the last 10 years, they've met 3 times. Georgia's 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread. Don't love the look at that for Clemson. But on the other end of the spectrum, Georgia did not cover a single spread last year in a non-conference game. 0-3-1 against the spread. Now, to be fair, on average, they were laying about 39 points in those games. So certainly this is a little bit different of a situation with the line down at 13.5. I would say neither of those trends really moved the needle for me. I mean, okay, Georgia 3-0 against Clemson in the last 10 years. These 2 teams completely different than the teams that played in those games. So I'm not really too worried about that. As far as betting this game, if you watched the live show yesterday, I said I was leaning towards Clemson at plus 13.5. And I guess if you forced me to make a pick against the spread, I would take the points with Clemson. But if I was forced to place one bet on this game, I think on paper it would be the over. I like both offenses better than I like both defenses. Georgia's offense might be the best in the country this year, just like it was last year. And Clemson, like I said multiple times in this video, I really like the shape their offense is in. So 48.5 with 2 of the best offenses in the country. The reason I don't know if I'll actually place that, I'm a little worried about the first game of the season at a neutral site. Those games tend to stay under the total. So I don't think I'll actually bet it. I mean, it's Clemson, Georgia, week 1. I don't know how much value there is or how much value I see in betting this game, to be honest, but I'll say over 48.5 for the video with a lean on Clemson plus 13.5. If you want to see all the bets I have open for week 1, head over to KyleKirms.com. There's a page called Open Bets. And you can see every single bet I currently have open on both NFL and college football. Also, you can see the entire staff. There's tabs. You can just click on whose bets you want to see. Also, when you sign up to Sauce Network Plus, it comes with access to the Discord, and you can participate in the weekly betting league. So if you're interested in that, head over to KyleKirms.com and sign up. Live shows every weekday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, weekends, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. Let's have ourselves a nice week 1, up a few dollars after week 0. Not much. I went 1-1, but my top bet hit. Hopefully the positivity continues. Remember to bet responsibly, and talk to you in the Discord.